January 22nd, 2020. A snowy evening in Quebec City's Sainte-Foy suburb. Inside a hotel room, 22-year-old Marilyn Levesque is about to meet someone who will change her life forever. By sunrise, Marilyn will be dead, and the killer, a man on day parole, will be confessing to police. This is the story of Marilyn Levesque's murder and the shock that rippled through Canada's justice system. Who was Marilyn Levesque? Marilyn Levesque was a 22-year-old woman living near Quebec City. She was known to family and friends as caring and hard-working. In her early 20s, Marilyn had struggled to make ends meet. Like many young women in need of income, she chose to work in an erotic massage parlor as an escort. In those days, every shift was a mix of hope and risk. Marilyn dreamed of a better future for herself. Tragically, those dreams were cut short that January night. Reporters and advocates later noted that Marilyn's death should have been preventable, a life lost at the wrong place, wrong time. Her family described her as very kind, very loving. Though we have few public details of her private life, it's clear she was a young woman with a future ahead of her. The man who came to that hotel room was 51-year-old Eustacio Galez, a violent repeat offender. Galez had been serving a life sentence for a brutal crime. On October 21, 2004, he murdered his common-law wife, 32-year-old Chantal Dechaines, beating her with a hammer and stabbing her. He was convicted in 2006 of second-degree murder and sentenced to life with no parole eligibility for 15 years. In prison, Galez gradually won some privileges. By early 2019, he was deemed low to moderate risk by the parole board and earned day parole. On March 26, 2019, Galez was allowed to leave the prison each day, returning only to a community residence at night. His parole conditions included strict rules. He had to check in daily and even report all relationships with women to his parole officer. But Galez's record was ominous. Beyond the murder of Dechaines, court documents note he had also assaulted a previous partner. Despite this, the parole board continued his day parole in September 2019, denying full parole. Officials, including Quebec's justice minister, later called his release decision entirely inappropriate. One briefing would note, public safety is the paramount consideration in all parole board decisions, yet at the time, Galez was free to move in the community. In the months before January 2020, Galez began visiting a local erotic massage parlor where Marilyn worked. By May 2019, he'd already met Marilyn there. Reports indicate the parole officer initially permitted Galez to visit the parlor once a month to satisfy his sexual needs, despite his history of violence. This decision, intended as a risk management strategy, proved controversial. March 26, 2019, Galez is granted day parole. His release plan includes attending counseling and reporting all contacts. May 2019, on parole, Galez meets Marilyn at her workplace, the massage parlor. He'd been allowed monthly visits, even though staff found him disturbing. Summer-fall 2019, Galez continues to see Marilyn periodically. In September, the parole board formally prohibits Galez from visiting parlors after staff reported he had been aggressive. Nonetheless, Galez flouts this rule, secretly returning weekly. January 22, 2020. The fatal meeting is arranged. Marilyn and Galez met in the hotel restaurant for a few drinks. Then, according to the coroner's report, they went up to a room on the third floor. In the hotel room, something went terribly wrong. Within minutes, Galez turned on Marilyn with unimaginable brutality. The coroner's investigation would find 57 stab wounds to her chest, stomach, and back, one of the most violent attacks reported in Quebec in years. It was a brutal, frenzied assault. According to the coroner, Marilyn had no chance. In agony, she died in that room, stabbed over 50 times. When investigators later compared notes, they were stunned by the sheer viciousness. Hours after the attack, Galais walked into a Montreal police station and confessed. It was January 23, 2020, still early morning. He turned himself in and admitted he had murdered Marilyn. By police accounts, he offered no resistance. Marilyn's body had been discovered in the room where they met, abandoned on the bed. The next days were a blur of police statements and headlines. Eustacio Galais was formally charged, originally with second-degree murder, later upgraded to first-degree due to the premeditated nature. In court on February 27, 2020, Galais pled guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years, on top of the life sentence he was already serving. Quebec City Police and the coroner pieced together the final hours. They confirmed Marilyn was alone with Galais at the time and had no way to seek help. The paranoia of stigma and illegality meant she kept silent even when violence erupted. Investigators also noted she had no idea Galais was a convicted killer. On paper, he was simply a visitor at the hotel. His parole conditions and past crimes were unknown to Marilyn and her colleagues. Across Canada, Marilyn's murder ignited fierce debate. News headlines quickly blamed system failures. Why was a convicted killer allowed to meet with sex workers? Critics called the parole board's decision madness and entirely inappropriate. One advocate summed it up: the January 22nd death exposed hypocrisy in how society treats sex work. Activists and columnists highlighted that Marilyn was the most vulnerable person in the room, a 23-year-old woman, a sex worker, alone at night. Canada's prostitution laws and stigma came under scrutiny. With sex workers forced underground by Bill C-36, they cannot safely report violent clients without risking arrest. Critics noted that Galais had initially been dangerous to women, yet parole officials strangely deemed it acceptable for him to visit appropriate women, meaning sex workers, to satisfy his sexual needs. This calculus, they argued, put Marilyn's safety last. Supporters of sex worker rights organized vigils and calls for decriminalization. Stella, a Montreal sex worker advocacy group led by Sandra Westley, demanded change. Westley reminded Canadians that even though selling sex was legal for women, the clients and locations were criminalized, forcing encounters like Marilyn's into secrecy. In homes and workplaces, many held momentary tributes, candles lit in memory, rallies demanding sex workers be treated as full human beings, not expendable targets. The uproar reached Ottawa. On February 5, 2020, MPs unanimously condemned the parole board for its role in the tragedy and ordered a full parliamentary inquiry. They specifically tasked the Public Safety Committee to examine how Galais, a violent offender, got day parole and whether recent changes to the parole board appointment process played a part. Over the next year, the committee held hearings and produced reports on parole and public safety. Meanwhile, the Correctional Service of Canada and Parole Board launched a joint Board of Investigation, BOI, to review all decisions around Galais' release. The BOI gathered facts, interviewed caseworkers, and ultimately issued dozens of recommendations by January 2021. In a parliamentary session, both CSC Commissioner Ann Kelly and Parole Board Chair Jennifer Aids expressed deep sorrow, saying Marilyn's death brought to light concerns with the corrections, parole, and justice systems. By late 2021, some concrete changes were underway. The National Parole Board announced it would strengthen supervision conditions and better train members on risk factors.
Quebec's coroner actually recommended mandatory electronic tracking bracelets for killers paroled into communities, a suggestion gaining traction nationwide. And in a gesture of accountability, the federal government agreed to compensate Marilyn's family for their loss, acknowledging the brave questions raised by this case. Remembering Marilyn, Legacy and Reflections. 5 years on, Marilyn Levesque's name has become emblematic of deeper issues. Her friends and advocates emphasize that she was not just a statistic. They remember her as a young woman who deserved to live in safety. In recent commentary, one legal group wrote that Marilyn's death is a consequence of criminalizing sex works and the stigma surrounding sex work. They argue that she, like all workers, deserved the safety and dignity that all workers deserve.
In memory of Marilyn Levesque, sex worker organizations and allies continue to push for reform, decriminalization of consensual sex work, better police training on violence in the industry, and more transparency in parole decisions. Each time a law is debated or a parole change made, Marilyn's story is recalled, a reminder of what can go wrong when people are left unprotected. As the screen fades, we see a quiet shot of a hotel window lit by moonlight. Marilyn never came home, but those who knew her urge us not to forget. We have to value the lives of sex workers, her supporters say. Ensuring Marilyn's tragic loss helps protect others in the future. This has been the case, Murder of Marilyn Levesque. This documentary script is based on news reports, official investigations, and survivor testimonials about the Marilyn Levesque case. Each fact is drawn from cited sources to ensure an accurate narrative. If you've watched this far, thank you. Cases like this deserve to be remembered, not forgotten. If you'd like to support more true crime documentaries told with respect, empathy, and facts, please consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment with your thoughts and share this video to help raise awareness. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next one.